Los Angeles was a city of dreams, wealth, and endless opportunities, but beneath the neon glow of billboards, behind the glass facades of towering skyscrapers, and among the rush of luxury cars and designer suits, there were always those who remained invisible, people the world had simply chosen to forget. On this particular day, Snoop Dogg wasn't in a hurry, just strolling, taking in the city, when suddenly he saw him. An elderly man sat slumped on the edge of the sidewalk, his worn-out military jacket the only reminder of who he had once been. His hands, rough and weathered, rested in his lap as countless pedestrians walked past him without a second glance. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't calling out for help. He had already accepted that no one was coming. But Snoop had never been the kind of man to ignore what others refused to see. He stopped. And what he learned in that moment would change everything. Los Angeles had always been a city that moved fast. People rushed from meetings to parties, from high-rise offices to exclusive nightclubs, always chasing something: money, status, recognition. And in that chase, it was easy to forget the ones who had stopped running a long time ago. Snoop Dogg had seen it all. He had grown up in this city, walked these streets before fame turned him into a legend. And even now, when he could have spent his day anywhere, he still liked to take these walks, just him, the pavement, and the pulse of the city that had raised him. But today, something made him stop. At first, it was just a shape on the sidewalk, another figure among the many who had been left behind by the world. But as Snoop got closer, he saw the old military jacket, the worn patches, the faded metals barely hanging onto the fabric. And then, he saw the man wearing it. Los Angeles was a city where everything moved at breakneck speed, where people barely looked up from their phones, where the sound of hurried footsteps and blaring car horns created a rhythm that never slowed down, never paused, never looked back. It was a city of dreams, but also a city of forgetfulness, a place where the past was quickly erased, where the people who had given everything were often left behind, swallowed by the streets, reduced to shadows that no one wanted to acknowledge. And yet, in the middle of all that motion, in the heart of all that noise, Snoop Dogg stopped. He saw what no one else seemed to notice: a man, seated on the edge of the sidewalk, shoulders slumped, gaze fixed downward, a forgotten soul in a city that only celebrated the new, the now, the next. The first thing that caught Snoop's attention wasn't the man's worn-out shoes or the defeated way he sat with his hands resting lifelessly in his lap. It was the jacket. A military-issued jacket, faded from time and sun, the fabric fraying at the edges, the once proud patches now barely hanging on, clinging to the last remnants of what they once represented. It was a piece of history that no one cared to remember, a symbol of service that had long been forgotten, much like the man who wore it. Snoop knew that kind of jacket. He had seen it before, on men who had given everything for their country, only to return home to find that their country had nothing left for them. The sight of it made something tighten in his chest. The veteran wasn't asking for anything, wasn't reaching out to passing strangers, wasn't holding a cardboard sign with words scrawled in desperation. He wasn't begging, wasn't pleading, he had already accepted that no one was coming. People passed by without a second glance, their eyes sliding right past him as if he were part of the sidewalk, just another piece of the cityscape that didn't matter. Pedestrians stepped around him without breaking their stride, as if acknowledging him would be too much, as if seeing him would make them feel guilty for doing nothing. Snoop had seen this kind of invisibility before. But he had never been the kind of man to ignore what others refused to see. Snoop could have kept walking, could have passed by like everyone else, could have let this moment slip away into the rush of the afternoon. But something about this man, something about the silence around him, the weight in his posture, the way he just sat there, as if the world had completely given up on him, made it impossible to turn away. So he didn't. He stopped. And in a city where people never slowed down, where distractions were endless, where caring about a stranger was something no one had time for, Snoop Dogg chose to notice. Snoop lowered himself to the curb, sitting beside the man as the city continued moving around them, as people kept walking, as cars sped by, as the world acted like nothing unusual was happening. "Yo, my man," Snoop said, his voice cutting through the background noise, his words landing softly but firmly. "You good?" For a long moment, there was nothing. No response, no movement, just the same stillness that had settled over the veteran long before Snoop arrived. And then, finally, the man looked up. And in his eyes, Snoop didn't see desperation, he saw something worse. He saw the look of a man who had already accepted that he didn't exist to anyone anymore. The man's face was withered, deep lines cutting through his skin like marks of time, each wrinkle telling a story of survival, of struggle, of years spent being overlooked. His hands, rough and cracked from the elements, trembled slightly as he adjusted the sleeves of his jacket, a motion so small, so automatic, that it was clear he had done it 1,000 times before, as if clinging to the one piece of his past that still felt real. He didn't answer right away, because he wasn't used to being spoken to. It had been so long since anyone had stopped, since anyone had actually seen him, that for a brief second, he seemed unsure whether Snoop's words were even meant for him. Finally, the man exhaled, a slow, tired breath that carried the weight of decades. His voice, when it finally came, was rough, uneven, the sound of someone who hadn't used it in conversation for far too long. "Yeah," he muttered, the word barely above a whisper, as if even he wasn't convinced it was true. Snoop nodded, letting the silence settle again, giving the man space to decide if he wanted to keep talking. Because Snoop knew when to speak, but more importantly, he knew when to listen. The veteran ran a hand over his jacket, fingers tracing the patches, his gaze distant now, looking past the street, past the people, past the moment. "Served in the Gulf," he said finally, his tone flat, factual, the words spoken without emotion. Not because he didn't feel anything, but because he had told this story too many times to people who never really listened. Came back. No family. No job. No place to go. Just another soldier who fought for a country that didn't fight for him. Snoop didn't interrupt. Didn't say, "Damn, that's messed up." Didn't try to fill the space with empty sympathy. He just let the man talk. Because after years of being ignored, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone be heard. The veteran finished speaking and fell silent again, as if waiting for the conversation to end like it always did, for Snoop to nod and walk away, for him to fade back into the background of the city that had long forgotten him. But Snoop didn't walk away. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a thick stack of bills, more than enough to get the man a meal, a room, a fresh start, and placed it firmly into his hands. The veteran looked down at the money, his fingers tightening around it, but it wasn't the cash that made his lip tremble. It was the fact that, for the first time in years, someone had truly seen him. Snoop rested a hand on the veteran's shoulder, meeting his gaze with something stronger than just kindness, with respect. "This ain't charity, homie," Snoop said. "This is respect." The veteran swallowed hard, his grip on the money tightening, his throat working around words he couldn't quite form. And when Snoop finally stood up, ready to leave, the old man reached out, gripping his wrist with a strength that surprised them both. "Thank you," the veteran said, his voice breaking. "For seeing me." Snoop just nodded. "Always." The veteran's fingers trembled slightly as they rested on the frayed edges of his military jacket, his hands rough and weathered, his nails chipped, the lines across his knuckles telling a story of years spent fighting battles far beyond the battlefield. He hadn't said much, but he didn't need to. His silence, the weight of his posture, the way his shoulders curved inward as if trying to shrink himself from the world, all spoke louder than words ever could. Snoop sat beside him, feet planted firmly on the curb, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes locked on the veteran, not with pity, not with sympathy, but with the quiet kind of understanding that only comes from someone who knows what it feels like to be underestimated, to be pushed aside, to be told in 1,000 different ways that you don't belong. He didn't need to rush the moment, didn't need to fill the silence with meaningless words, because he knew some stories take time to be told. And this man? This man had been waiting for someone to listen for a very, very long time. The old soldier finally exhaled, a slow, measured breath that carried with it years of exhaustion, of disappointment, of resignation. He shifted slightly, adjusting his sleeves, his fingers grazing the barely holding on patches stitched onto the jacket, a habit, something automatic, something he did when he had nothing else to hold onto. Came back from the Gulf, he said, his voice gravelly, rough from years of disuse, the words slow, deliberate, like each one carried too much weight to rush. Did my time, followed orders, did what I was supposed to do. Snoop didn't speak. He just nodded. Because this wasn't the kind of story you interrupted. The veteran let his gaze drop to the cracked pavement beneath his boots, his fingers still playing with the torn fabric of his jacket, his mind lost somewhere far beyond the present. There was no bitterness in his voice, no anger, just a quiet acceptance, the kind that settles in after years of realizing that life doesn't always give back what you put into it. Came home to nothing, he muttered. No job, no place to go, no one waiting for me. Snoop could feel the weight of those words settling between them, the emptiness of coming back from war only to find that the battle didn't end overseas, it just changed locations. The veteran chuckled, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that came from amusement. It was hollow, dry, the kind of sound a man makes when he's long past expecting anything different. Thought they'd have something for me. A place, a program, a way back in. But you know what I got? Snoop didn't answer. He already knew. Got a handshake, the veteran said. Got a thank you for your service. Got people clapping at the airport when we walked through. Then, nothing. His jaw tightened. And the worst part, he added, his voice quieter now, as if the truth of it was still too sharp to say out loud. Ain't even mad about it no more. Just got used to it. Snoop let out a slow breath, staring at the man in front of him, at the jacket that had once meant something, at the hands that had held weapons in war and now held nothing but empty time. He knew people who had struggled, knew what it was like to fight your way up from nothing, but this was something else. The veteran didn't end up here because he made bad choices, because he wasn't strong enough, because he didn't try. He ended up here because the world only cared about soldiers when they were wearing the uniform, not when they took it off. And that didn't sit right with Snoop Dogg. The veteran didn't ask for anything. Not a dollar, not a favor, not even sympathy. And somehow, that made it worse. Because it meant he wasn't just struggling, he had accepted it. Snoop swallowed, feeling something tighten in his chest. He had spent his life rising from the streets, building something out of nothing, proving people wrong over and over again. But this wasn't about proving anything. This was about a man who had already lost more than he ever should have. You ever try getting help? Snoop asked finally. The veteran let out another one of those humorless chuckles. Yeah, he said. A long time ago. He didn't elaborate. Because he didn't need to. Snoop glanced around, watching the people passing by, the ones who never stopped, never looked, never acknowledged that a man who had once risked his life for this country was now sitting on a cold sidewalk, forgotten. They walked past him like he was part of the concrete. Like he wasn't real. Like he wasn't worth seeing. And that was the part that made Snoop's stomach twist the most. Snoop wasn't a politician. He wasn't a government program. But he was a man. A man who had the ability to help. A man who refused to pretend he hadn't seen what was right in front of him. So he reached into his pocket, pulled out a thick stack of cash, not just a couple of bills, not just enough for a meal, but enough to change something. The veteran's eyes flickered to it, but his fingers didn't reach for it. Not right away. Because he wasn't used to being offered anything. Snoop pressed the cash into the veteran's hands, firm, solid, like it wasn't a gift, it was a transaction. A trade. Respect for respect. This ain't charity, Snoop said, locking eyes with the man. This is respect. The veteran swallowed hard, staring at the money, then at Snoop, and for the first time in the entire conversation, something shifted in his expression. It wasn't gratitude. It was something deeper. Something closer to dignity. Snoop stood up, dusting off his jeans, giving the man the final nod. He could have left it at that, could have walked away knowing he had done something good, could have just let the moment fade. But then, the veteran reached out. Not for more money. Not for help. Just to grip Snoop's wrist. And when he spoke, his voice broke slightly. "Thank you," he said, his words slow, heavy. "For seeing me." Snoop just nodded. Always. Snoop Dogg had given away money before, helped people on the streets, paid for meals, handed out stacks of cash to those in need, but this wasn't just about money. This was about something bigger, something deeper, something that no amount of cash could truly fix. As he sat there, feet planted firmly on the curb beside the veteran, he realized this wasn't about charity, this was about respect. Because this man didn't just need a handout, he needed to be acknowledged, needed to be seen, needed to be reminded that his life still mattered, even if the world had done everything it could to convince him otherwise. And that was something money couldn't buy. The old man's fingers hovered over the stack of bills for a second, not reaching for it, not grabbing it, just staring at it like it was something foreign, something unreal. His hands were rough, calloused, marked by time and struggle, fingers that had once gripped a rifle, that had once held onto something solid, something real, and now they trembled as they touched the paper. He blinked, his expression unreadable, his lips parting slightly like he wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Because he wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to kindness, to generosity, to a moment where someone wasn't ignoring him, wasn't walking past him like he was nothing. For a lifetime, he had been overlooked. And now, someone had stopped. Someone had noticed. Snoop didn't rush him, didn't push, didn't tell him to take it. Because this wasn't about forcing something onto him, this was about giving him the choice. The veteran had spent too many years feeling like his choices had been taken away from him, feeling like the world had moved on without him. So Snoop let the moment stretch, let the man decide for himself whether or not he wanted to take what was being offered. And finally, with a deep breath, the veteran closed his fingers around the money. Not quickly. Not eagerly. Just firmly. Like a man reclaiming something. The veteran's hands shook as he held the bills, his knuckles whitening slightly, his lips pressing together, his eyes locked onto the money like he wasn't sure if it was even real. But it wasn't the cash itself that made him tremble, it was the meaning behind it. Because this wasn't just some strangers throwing a few dollars at him and walking away, wasn't just someone feeling guilty for 5 seconds before forgetting he ever existed. This was different. This was a man looking him in the eyes and saying, without having to say it, "I see you. You matter." And that meant more than anything. The old man finally looked up, his tired eyes locking onto Snoop's, and for the first time since this conversation started, there was something in them that hadn't been there before. It wasn't gratitude, wasn't disbelief, wasn't even relief. It was recognition. Recognition of the fact that someone had stopped for him. Recognition that, even if just for this moment, he wasn't invisible anymore. And that was everything. Snoop had made a lot of transactions in his life, contracts, record deals, investments, but this wasn't a financial exchange. This was an exchange of respect. "This ain't charity, homie," Snoop said, his voice calm but firm, his hand still resting on the veteran's shoulder. "This is respect." And those words landed harder than any dollar ever could. For a moment, the veteran didn't say anything. He just sat there, gripping the money, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths, as if something inside him had cracked open, something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Not just hope, but dignity. Then, finally, he nodded. It was small. Barely noticeable. But it was there. And for a man who had spent so long accepting that the world had moved on without him, that nod meant everything. People were still walking past, still rushing, still caught up in their own lives. Cars were still honking, still weaving through traffic, still pushing forward without looking back. But here, in this one moment, the world had paused for just long enough for someone to be remembered. And Snoop knew that was worth more than anything. As Snoop finally started to stand, ready to leave, the veteran reached out, not for more money, not for another favor, but just to grip Snoop's wrist, his fingers tight, strong, steady. And when he spoke, his voice was rough, but it didn't waver. "Thank you," the man said, "for seeing me." Snoop looked down at him, nodded once, and responded with only one word. "Always." Then he turned, walking away, leaving the man sitting there, but no longer feeling forgotten. Because from this moment on, no matter what happened next, he had been seen. And sometimes, that was all someone needed to start again. The veteran sat there, gripping the stack of bills that Snoop Dogg had placed in his hands, his fingers rough and weathered, his knuckles swollen from years of hard living, his nails cracked from the weight of time. But his grip wasn't weak, it was strong, firm, like a man holding onto something real for the first time in a long time. Not because of the money itself, but because of what it represented. For years, he had been ignored, overlooked, reduced to nothing more than another shadow on the sidewalk, just another forgotten face in a city that never slowed down. But right now, at this moment, he wasn't invisible anymore. And that was worth more than anything. Snoop watched as the veteran turned the bills over in his hands, his fingers brushing against the edges like he was afraid it might disappear if he let go, like it was some kind of illusion, like the moment itself wasn't real. Because when you spend enough time being forgotten, being ignored, being nothing, it gets hard to believe that anything good can come your way without a price. And that hit Snoop harder than he expected. Because this wasn't a man who had lost his fight, this was a man who had been convinced he didn't deserve to fight anymore. And that wasn't right. The veteran finally looked up, his eyes meeting Snoop's, and for the first time since the conversation started, there was something different in them. Before, they had been tired, sunken, filled with the kind of exhaustion that doesn't just come from lack of sleep, but from a lifetime of being let down. Now, there was something else. It wasn't gratitude, wasn't relief, it was dignity. Because for the first time in too long, he didn't feel like a man begging for something. He felt like a man being given what he was owed. People still walked by, still avoided eye contact, still moved through the city like they had somewhere more important to be. Cars still sped past, their tires screeching against the hot asphalt, their drivers oblivious to the moment unfolding just feet away. The world hadn't stopped, hadn't paused, hadn't given this moment the attention it deserved, but Snoop had. And for the veteran, for this man who had given everything for a country that had given him nothing in return, that was enough. The old man swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as he fought to keep his voice steady, as he fought to find the right words, as he fought to believe that this was actually happening. His lips parted once, then closed. Twice. Then finally, his voice broke through the weight of the moment. "I don't know what to say." Snoop just nodded. "Then don't say nothing, homie. Just take it." Because this wasn't about words. This was about something bigger. The veteran let out a breath, shaky, uneven, like his lungs were struggling to catch up with what was happening, like his body hadn't processed it yet. Because gratitude wasn't just about saying thank you, sometimes it was about the way a man's hands shook as he held something that made him feel whole again. And right now, that was enough. The silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable, filled with meaning, filled with the weight of something that neither of them had expected to happen today. Then, the veteran finally spoke again. But why? His voice wasn't questioning the money. It was questioning the gesture. Because he had been forgotten for so long, had been invisible for so many years, that now, when someone actually saw him, actually cared, he didn't know how to process it. Snoop exhaled, slow and steady, his gaze locked on the veterans, making sure that every word that came out of his mouth hit exactly the way it needed to. "'Cause I see you." That was it. No long speech. No over-explaining. Just the truth. And that was all the veteran needed to hear. As Snoop stood up, dusting off his jeans, the veteran reached out, not for more money, not for another favor, but just to grip Snoop's wrist. And in that grip, there was strength. Strength that had once belonged to a soldier. Strength that had once belonged to a man who had stood tall, who had fought, who had believed he had a place in the world. Strength that had been lost somewhere along the way, but today, it came back. And that was worth more than any amount of money. The veteran's fingers tightened around Snoop's wrist, his voice steady, clear, unwavering. "Thank you," he said, "for seeing me." Snoop just nodded. "Always." Then he turned, walking away, letting the moment settle, letting the veteran hold onto it, letting him decide for himself what it meant. Because Snoop hadn't just given him money. He had given him back something much bigger. Something the world had taken from him. His dignity. Snoop Dogg walked away, his footsteps slow, deliberate, letting the weight of the moment settle as the world around him continued its relentless motion. The city hadn't changed. People still walked by without looking, still rushed past without noticing, still lived their lives without realizing that, for one man, everything had just shifted. The veteran sat on the curb, gripping the money in his hands, his fingers pressing into the paper as if he were trying to memorize the feeling of it, not the cash itself, but the moment. Because today, someone had stopped. Someone had seen him. And for the first time in a long, long time, he wasn't invisible anymore. By the next morning, word had spread. People talked. Some had seen it happen, others had heard whispers of it, and soon, the story was more than just an interaction between two men on the street. It was a reminder. A reminder that not all stories end in silence. A reminder that one act, one moment, one choice to stop instead of walk past can change everything. For Snoop, it was never about the money. It was never about attention. It was about respect. And for the veteran, it wasn't just about what he received. It was about what he got back. His dignity. His place in the world. The knowledge that, even if just for today, he mattered. Snoop had given away money before. He had helped people before. But this was different. Because sometimes, what people need isn't just food, shelter, or a warm place to sleep. Sometimes, what they need is to be seen. And on that day, sitting on a curb in the middle of a city that never slows down, Snoop Dogg made sure that one man wasn't forgotten. Not anymore.